As Americans, September 11th, 2001 is ingrained in our memories as one of the darkest days in history. That Tuesday started off like any other morning. New Yorkers waiting in line for their morning joe, commuters hopping on the subway, and the bustling sound of honking taxis filling the streets.
September 11th, 2001, it sort of dawned bright and beautiful on the East Coast of the United States. It was, one of those sort of amazing late summer days where there isn't a cloud in the sky.
That's Mitchell Zuckoff, former reporter at the Boston Globe, professor at Boston University, and author of Fall and Rise, The Story of 9/11. Zuckoff wrote the front-page story for the Boston Globe the day after the attacks.
We felt, I think from the very first, this tremendous responsibility to get it right, to tell people what was happening. It was still at a moment where people were relying on their morning newspaper more than they were perhaps on Twitter or on news flashes to understand what was happening and that the world was changing as they were opening their morning paper.
In his new book, Fall and Rise, Zuckoff highlights several stories from that day. One is of the Hansen family, who were on their way to Disneyland.
Peter and Sue Kim, the young, lovely couple, Peter had business that week out in California, and he decided to turn it into a family vacation. And his wife, Sue Kim, was close to getting her PhD at Boston University, and they had this delightful 2-year-old girl, Christine, who called her grandmother shortly before they left and said, "Nama, I'm going to go see Mickey." They got on to Flight 175, which was the second plane that was hijacked, and it was the worst imaginable circumstances because suddenly they're herded to the back of the plane by the hijackers. And Christine, it's hard to imagine if she knew what was happening at 2, but Peter and Sue Kim certainly did, and Peter called his father, Lee Hansen, in Connecticut, to tell him what was happening.
Knowing his family was aboard Flight 175, Lee Hansen watched on TV as the plane crashed and exploded into the South Tower. His 2-year-old granddaughter, Christine Hansen, was the youngest victim of 9/11. Down below, first responders reacted to the explosions and rushed to the fiery scene.
Jay Jonas and the men of Ladder 6 were about a mile from the Twin Towers when they were hit. And they responded instantly. They jump on their ladder truck. And these guys, to me, they're a version of real-life superheroes. Jay understood on his way over there, this was not a fire they could fight. If you understood fire science, you understand that a fire at that level, at that height, in a high-rise building, that each floor was about the size of an acre, they wouldn't have water to fight it. This was at best a rescue job, and yet they went up anyway. And they understood that they were going to have to climb 60, 80, perhaps 90 floors inside a building as people were streaming toward the exit, and they didn't hesitate.
The first hijacked plane hits the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. The second plane then crashes into the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. In under an hour, the South Tower falls. Despite fears of the North Tower soon collapsing, firefighters in the building continue their search and rescue.
As they're going down, they come across this woman, Josephine Harris, who had been up on the 60th in the 60s and had run out of steam. She had fallen arches, she had had a leg injury from a previous incident, and she had given up. And she just told them, "Leave me here, let me die." And Jay and his men wouldn't. And so despite the fact that they know that they've got to get out, they stop, they slow, they take turns helping and carrying and assisting Josephine on the way down. And the North Tower starts to collapse, and Jay thinks it's the end. And they protect Josephine, they throw themselves on her, and they're in the lower floors of the North Tower as it's collapsing around them, above them.
The collapse leaves a few lower levels of the stairwell intact, where Jonas, his men, and Josephine are, and they're able to get out. While they survived, thousands perished. Nearly 3,000 people were killed on 9/11, including 343 firefighters and paramedics. Now, almost 18 years later, there is an entire generation that has little connection to the attacks and the horrors that took place that clear September morning.
There is a hunger to know what happened, and there's a hunger to understand it. And the reason I wrote Fall and Rise was to remind people who have the memories and to provide memories for those younger generations who don't have it. We did come together. We understood that this was an attack on all of us. The very fact that we were Americans, regardless of race, creed, or national origin.
In the months following the attacks, Americans felt a sense of unity and pride. First responders were heralded for their efforts. People worked together to rebuild what was lost. It's important to share these stories because the fight still continues for those affected. Cancer rates connected to 9/11 are higher than ever before in the first responder community. Despite this, funding for the Victims' Compensation Fund is running out. The fund, created in 2011, compensates victims and families for 9/11-linked deaths and illnesses.
You have people still suffering and still dying, and people who have been approved for awards for compensation and whose awards have been cut or slashed because the money isn't there.
Comedian and activist Jon Stewart testified in front of the House earlier this month with an emotional appeal to extend the fund until 2090.
You're talking about people who didn't ask, would I be taken care of? What about my family? What about my health? They responded instantly to a job that they had to do, that they believed in.
The criticism from Stewart and public accounts from first responders have spurred action in D.C., as the bill is now expected to pass through the House and Senate this summer. To learn more about Zuckoff's new book, Fall and Rise, The Story of 9/11, visit our website at viewpointsonline.net. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio, and subscribe and listen to our show anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Our writer-producer for this segment is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Diane Guerrero, and while orange is still the new black, oranges and fresh fruit help nourish communities and provide oxygen for clean air. That's why I dig fruit trees. And I'm planting alongside VitaFusion Gummy Vitamins and the Fruit Tree Planting Foundation to plant 200,000 fruit trees, generating 28 million pieces of nutrient-rich fruit and 33 million pounds of oxygen, so people can breathe easier, improve the soil quality, and make a positive impact on our planet for generations to come. Visit WeDigFruitTrees.com.
Trying to sell your old car? Instead, donate your vehicle to Heritage for the Blind. Pickup is free and your donation is tax deductible. Just call 1-800-835-1478. Heritage for the Blind accepts cars, vans, trucks, and boats, whether they run or not. Donate your vehicle and you'll receive a free 3-day vacation voucher to over 50 locations. Call 1-800-835-1478. That's 1-800-835-1478.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints Radio, a production of Media Tracks Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Viewpoints stories on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and viewpointsonline.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Coming up next week.
This is a trait to do with how open-minded you are. We seem to find that's quite a prominent trait, actually, to determine the types of emoji people use.
How do the emojis you use reflect who you are? Then,
it's cost 6 people their lives, and it's cost many others their fortunes and their sanity.
An innocent hobby turned into deadly obsession next week.
on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.